details represent like the feminine nature. If we see like a man, he builds a house. And we're generalizing now, but man builds a house, woman makes it into a home. Why or how? With all the details. All these things that match and colors and drapes and stuff that men don't get, but they can appreciate. So that's where all the value comes, because the house, maybe you will not freeze to death in January, but it's not really going to fulfill you if it's just an empty concrete shell, right? So neglecting the details or you making the general statement that, oh, the details, we can adjust the details, is a very dangerous thing, because what details? I'm sure anyone would have a hard time adjusting other details, like the guru of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. He would sit and chant, and then if he got too hungry, he would just take a handful of dirt and eat that. So should we adjust that detail? I'm sure a lot of those who don't mind adjusting details, they would be pretty fried out if we served a bucket of dirt for morning prasadam, because hey, it's just a detail, we can adjust it, so you don't get too attached in these things. But suddenly that would not fly so well. But then the whole thing about Vedic, about the dress and stuff, that's not, it's just a detail, I'll wear my jeans and a t-shirt. So where does it come from? When the bucket of dirt can't be adjusted, but the dhoti can be adjusted, where does it come from? It's not from scripture, so it's from our own mind. Because we like to wear jeans and a t-shirt. And that's fine. That's fine, because Krishna, preserves what we have and carries what we lack, or is it the other way around? I always forget. But anyway, we should just know that it's from our own mind. The main thing when preaching, and we are a preaching movement, that's Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he very much made this into a preaching movement. What was it, like 60,000 disciples or something, give or take, depending on how you define a disciple, of course. But I mean, he went all over and defeated everybody, and that was the mood that Prabhupada took up in going to the West. It was not because he felt like it would be fun. It was because that's how we do it. So in preaching, we should be careful about not preaching our own condition. We should be comfortable in preaching, because if we're not comfortable, nobody else is going to be comfortable with us. So if we like to wear jeans and a t-shirt, or we like to wear funny hats, or we like to whatever, have gray tilak instead of the more yellowish, do that. Because then you'll be comfortable, then whoever you preach to will also be comfortable. There's nothing more difficult than preach to someone you're not comfortable with, because they'll sense it right away, even if they don't, sense it like consciously, subconsciously, there will be something. So whatever we need to do, like Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj, he said, if I have to wear a chicken costume to preach Krishna consciousness, I'll do that. So whatever we need to do, as long as we actually preach Krishna consciousness, and as long as we acknowledge that it's our own situation, not necessarily that we have to project it onto everybody else, because that's the neophyte problem, is that we have a hard time distinguishing between what is actually transcendental and what is actually material. So we think that the material situation is the devotion. So then we have the two deviations, the sahaja and the smarta brahmana deviation. The sahaja, that, it doesn't matter, I'm a devotee, so whatever I do is devotional. And the smarta, that it's all about the externals, it's all about the details. If I do the details right, that means I'm a better devotee than someone who doesn't do all the details correct. Right? So you mix those together, then you basically have someone from the West. He'll do whatever he wants, and then anyone who does things differently are nonsense. That's not necessarily a very good platform for spreading the love. But that, nevertheless, to some extent, this is the confusion that we're all living with, because we haven't been trained in these things. So it's a learning process. So for the Majjhim, it's very easy to distinguish between these things, and he will preach based on principles of devotion and how they have been applied by the previous acharyas, right? So anyone who's not following better have a good reason, and anyone who's following are honored, So that's the preaching. The Uttamadhikari, he just sees everything in connection with the Lord, and as such, everything is just the Lord's Leela, manifest or unmanifest, but still. So he's not much good at preaching because he just thinks everything is transcendental. So then he comes down to the Majjhim level. We, as preachers, can function on the Majjhim level, even though we are kanistas by our consciousness, because that's the mercy of Prabhupada in his books and such. We can talk about actually principles that we're not always able to follow. So if we make sure that we're comfortable and that we're actually sincere, then we can preach all these things even though we may not always follow them. Does that make sense? And it's tricky because it sounds like a little bit hypocritical. You're preaching what you cannot follow, but it's not actually, as long as you're sincere. As long as you're sincerely trying. That's what all the great acharyas, I'm the most fallen, Prabhupada writes when he comes to New York, I'm your most fallen servant. He knows that it's not his qualities, it's not him, it's Krishna's qualities, but Krishna gives the qualities to him if he's a true devotee, which fortunately for all of us, he is. So how do we deal with that? Because we're not on Prabhupada's level, we're not on Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's level. So what do? Well, first of all, point it inwards. When we read these things, we should be thinking about how we ourselves apply these things and not spend too much time on how everyone else is applying it, right? If we want to preach, we want to inspire, because for someone to take up devotional service, they have to be inspired because they have to move themselves. We can't actually change anyone, they can only change themselves, so we have to inspire them. That means not telling them what to do, but showing them what they could do and then allowing themselves to, take it up. So that means that we can see how much of our devotional life is spent in conflict. That's a very good indicator that something is wrong. If you're constantly arguing and debating with your surroundings, then it means something is wrong. Because if you're doing something right, it should give a result that is beneficial, and that result should be able to speak for itself. However, if that result is not coming and you still think it's all the other Vaishnavas' fault and you're arguing with them all the time, then it could be an indicator that maybe there's some little small detail here and there that you could adjust yourself. Talking about adjusting the details, right? So that's generally, in this internet age, is generally something that seems difficult for some Vaishnavas. You get all these heavy things going on. Basically because of lack of faith and lack of association, right? So that's what actually is the point of all of this. Obviously the ultimate point, the Purushartha as it's called, is the love of God. But the immediate point, or the Kratvartha, which is called, is association of devotees. These qualities, these 30 qualities, this system, the social system of Varnashram, is to secure that we can have nice association, so we don't get on each other's nerves, because the material energy is pushing all the time, and because we have a different kind of acquired nature. Prabhupada calls the conditioning the acquired nature. There's constitutional nature as servant of God, and then there's the acquired nature, which we've acquired over millions of lifetimes of association with the material energy. That sometimes is kind of grinding against each other, because we have different things we like, different things we think are important. So if we adopt these principles, then we can make sure that we are grinding against each other as little as possible, right? So then when the right association is there, then the right activities will also be there, right? Because then automatically, if you're with the devotees, they chant, dance and feast, so you will be chanting, dancing and feasting. Like Prabhupada said also that if you want to be a drunkard, you hang out with drunkards, you'll be an expert drinker. But if you want to be an expert chanter, you hang out with the devotees and you'll become expert at that. So that's what the point is here. So just quickly running through, basically we have 3 flavors of renunciate: brahmachari, vanaprastha and sannyas, right? But that's how you position yourself in your spiritual life. The surroundings that are most beneficial for you in terms of thinking of Krishna. So brahmachari means student, right? Acceptance of authority, simplicity. Vanaprastha means after. Okay, we do grihastha now. Grihastha means expansion. You're engaging with the material energy. So you have the house, you have all these things, the furniture, and you generate funds, or you generate and expand. And this, within grihastha, you have the 4 varnas, right? So you have brahmana, kshatriya, vaishya and shudra. Now for the varnas, you have, this is a good thing to think about, because in every activity, see, we become fried out if we hear that, oh, you're a Shudra if you have a job. Nobody wants to be the Shudra. They're described in Shastra as kind of, stupid, lazy, I don't want to be. But we don't have to think of it like that. Just think of it, whatever activity we're engaged in, that activity is either Shudra, Vaishya, Kshatriya or Brahman, right? So if you're engaged in that activity, there is a certain principle that you should be following. It's very simple. Shudra, just humility. If someone else asks you to do something, don't get fried out about if it's going to work out or you want to do it in a different way. Just be humble and help out. And then the other guy is supposed to worry about whether or not it's done right. So you see that in India a lot. The Sudras, they really understand this principle. They really do not care how things are done. If you get them for cheap, but the finished product is of a matching nature. So, but when you talk about stress or depression, sometimes when they want me to take them with them to Denmark, I try to talk to them about stress and depression in Denmark. They don't understand what I'm talking about. They just ask me, why do you do like that? Why don't you do something different? So they don't understand it because they're just not engaged like that. So that's a problem in Denmark, that we're trying to push everybody through the university, and everybody has to be intellectuals and they have to be self-made men and all these things. And it's an impossible situation because you can't do that. And especially with feminism, because then the woman has to have all the female qualities and all the masculine qualities also. So she has the perfect children, the perfect dress, and she's smart and sexy and the right political attitude, and she's also like the head of human resources for a multinational company, and she's also really good with the money, and she's in the garden, and it's just, nobody can do that, it's just impossible. So it generates anxiety, it generates stress, which leads to depression. So for the Shudra, it's really nice that you just don't worry. Don't worry about it. Don't get into a whole fight, just what to do. Very easy, very simple. Vaishya, give in charity. You can make as much money as you want, as long as you're a little charitable. Because nobody wants anyone who's like hoarding gold. It says in the first canto, that's where Kali resides. The 4 vices: meat eating, gambling, illicit sex and intoxication, and then where gold is hoarded. That's where Kali resides. So if a Vaishya is hoarding gold and not giving in charity, it's not going to work out. Simple, very simple principle. Kshatriya, protection. You're deciding on behalf of other people what is to be done and what is not to be done. You're moving around with their lives, so they have to feel protection. You have to make sure that they know you're listening to them and you're taking into account their concerns and their thoughts and ideas. Very simple again. And the Brahmana, renunciation. Because if you're supposed to be this authority and you're supposed to be trustworthy, then you cannot have an ulterior motive. And if you're attached, attachment is an ulterior motive. So if you come here and you talk about renunciation and simplicity and bhakti, and then you have a Mercedes out front you drive off in after the class, chances are that those who are listening may not take it to heart so much. But if you're living a very simple life, you don't have any much, you only have the bare necessities. It's like, yes, the world doesn't really have anything that he needs so he's trustworthy, because why would he say anything if he didn't mean it? So like that, very simple again. This is all that it is. It's so, Bhaktivinoda Purna Swami said one time we were talking, he said, it's scary simple. That's why we don't understand it. It's not because it's complicated, it's because it's that simple. It doesn't actually allow for our mind to kind of wander off and imagine things. So then the two last ashrams, Vanaprastha is the same as Grihastha, just going the opposite direction, just slowly decreasing the material engagements. And they are good as advisors for Grihasthas because they've tried it all, they're not impressed and not confused. And then you have the sannyas, who's just done. He's just finished. And that means he can spend anything and everything for Krishna. If he has a lot, he spends a lot for Krishna. If he has nothing, he spends nothing, but that's still for Krishna. So then he's the ideal preacher. So that's Varnashram. Now, it says here, the whole purpose of the system is to create good population. As stated in Bhagavad Gita, when women are polluted, the populace is Varnashankara, and when the Varnashankara population increases, the situation of the entire world becomes hellish. So, welcome to the Western world. They're not using Varnashram, they're actually actively promoting the opposite. That they're promoting you can do what you want, but they're doing more than that. They're promoting go against your nature. If you're a man and you want to be in a woman's body, hooray for you. If you are coming from a family of craftsmen and you want to be an architect or a businessman, good for you. You're breaking the social bonds and stuff like that. So anything that goes against the nature is celebrated because it means we can do whatever we want. There's no restriction. And that's what the mind wants. So it's just a mind-governed society, right? And as it said, the entire world becomes hellish. And we can see stress, depression, these things, alcoholism, they're rampant in this society. And they're celebrated, again. And you know what to do. So Varna Shankara means mixed Varnas. It means that when you're, intermingling without any kind of intelligence, then you will have mixed Varnas. You will have a little bit of this, that, and the other thing in your acquired nature, which makes it more complicated, more difficult. So, like, I'm at the university. We were talking about the university. I'm out there at the university, and you have all these young people there who are not supposed to be there. But the society says that you got to go to university and you have to get a degree and then you'll get a good job, and that's what they want. They just want security. They just want a good job. And you're not going to get it from the university even then, because it's pretty much useless, the university degrees today. But more than that, they're sitting out there and they're stressed out of their mind because they're not intellectuals. They're being asked to perform intellectual activities, but they're not intellectuals. So it's very stressful for them. And when they have to do a presentation, they have to get it up in front of the whole crowd and talk intellectual lingo, and they've learned some of the words, long 4-syllable words, but they don't know what they're talking about because they don't like it. So why are we doing this? What's the point? We have a society where X amount of activities have to be performed in order for the society to run. How many of those activities are intellectual? A fraction of a fraction. Most of it is like having a shop or a sweeping street or policeman or fireman or carpenter, or that's what we need to run a country. We don't need people intellectualizing over it, or globalization and yes, internet. I mean, that's just, internet is something we use to look at videos of kittens. It's not something that runs the society. It's complete delusion to think that we will have a better society by forcing these young people through the universities, so they will get stressed out and be completely, to put it mildly, skeptical around authorities, have authority issues, and then put them in some low, from the society point of view, low-class job anyway. They'll all feel like failures. So whose fault is it? Syrian refugees. Of course it is. It can't be me, because I can do anything. So it must be the other guys. This is why everything is going wrong. We want the acknowledgement of being an intellectual without being one. We want the power and influence of the Kshatriya without doing anything for society, without giving the protection. And we want all the money, but we don't want to give in charity unless we can make like the big check so everyone can see how much we give. That's not actual charity. That's just you're buying goodwill. And then we want the total absence of responsibility of the sutras. So how's that going to work? It's not. It's not. And we don't have to. That's why only a God-conscious society can work out. Because if you have a God-centered society, all of these things are just tools. Like, that's where we started out, right? That these are just tools to engage in Krishna service. Service of Krishna is the value, not the position, the social position or the material situation, but the actual devotion to Krishna. So in Bhagavatam, is actually the sutra is actually glorified. We often forget that, but I think it's second canto. I forget now where it is, but there's a whole thing where the sutra is glorified because he's humble. That's what we say when we glorify a devotee. We always say he's so humble. He can be a lot of things, but definitely he's always humble, when we glorify someone. So it's very easy and simple for the sutra. Just do your duty, go back to Godhead. And don't get involved in all of these other things. Some will have an acquired nature which just pushes them into these things. The Vaishya needs to make money. He thinks about money all the time. He can't help himself. The Kshatriya gets super fried out if things are not done properly. He has to engage so things are done properly. And the Brahmana just looks at the whole thing and thinks this is completely waste of time and goes for the Shastra. So they will do it anyway, whether we advise them to or not. They will do it anyway. So then we might as well do it for the better of society, create a situation where we all can be Krishna conscious and go back to God. That's why in Briha Bhagavatamrita, the devotees are measured by their importance. Now the final point is, of course, that they're all equally important for Krishna because he loves everyone. But actually the southern king is put higher than the Prayag Brahmana because the southern king is engaging his nature so that everyone can be Krishna conscious. He has a whole Krishna conscious kingdom. Whereas the Brahmana, even though on the Varnashram system he's higher, he's just engaged in his own worship. Right? So if we just engage it in Krishna service, whatever it is, it's perfect. Shudra, Vaishya, Kshatriya, Brahmana, it's perfect. As long as we engage in Krishna service. If we don't, it's useless. Whether it's Brahmana or Shudra or Varnashram, if it's not connected to Krishna, it's still useless. So the materialists, the Shudra and the Vaishya, they are considered further away because they're more focused on the material, but they're sometimes easier to convince because they're not so strong in their position. Whereas the more intellectual, the Kshatriya and the Brahmana, they are closer to being, if they just switch and connect to Krishna, they almost have perfected already. But it's more difficult to connect with them because their position is higher. Does that make sense? And sometimes preaching to an intellectual, even though he's more because he's more intelligent, it's more difficult. Because he'll always claim, yes, on this hand, on that hand, and he has a whole false ego thing going with his intellect. Whereas the the sailor or the carpenter or something, they don't have a false ego about being, I mean, if you come and talk to them about something far out, they'll kind of, that's far out. I met this monk the other day, he says that reincarnation, that's pretty far out. They don't usually argue so much about it, so it's easier to actually connect with them. So that's the time, place, and circumstances. That's the details that we can adjust. Is when we're engaging with others, is there something I should emphasize or not emphasize? But if we start adjusting on the principle level, does that make sense? That we adjust something and then everybody should be adjusting to this way. It indicates that it's actually ourselves we're talking about. Right? It's actually to make a comfortable situation for ourselves. So I think that's the alarm. That means I am now finished.
What do we have no breakfast today?
Huh?
I think 5 minutes more.
5 minutes more. Can we set the alarm again so I know how much
Okay.
5 minutes is?
Yep.
Okay. So we always have to, in Vedic, everything is always analyzed from Sambandha to Abhideya to Prayojana. Sambandha meaning our situation, our relationships, what we're dealing with. Abhideya meaning our activity, whatever activity we perform using that situation. And then Prayojana, the result that we get. And then when we get that Prayojana, it moves back to Sambandha. Then we have a new Sambandha. And it just goes round and round like that. So sometimes what the confusion is, not to separate these things. That in our Abhideya there will always be, in our activity there will always be adjustments. Because every endeavor is covered by some fault. So there will always be something that we have to suddenly adjust, or something, I forgot the plate, or it's windy and cold in Denmark, I'll wear my pants. Whatever it is, you'll always adjust something. The problem is if that kind of, what is the word? Starts permeating the prayojana, the goal, that actually, actually the goal is to wear pants or to forget the plates or something, that no, it's not about remembering the plates, so therefore to prove that point we should deliberately forget the plates, because it's not about the plates. See how detached I am. I didn't even take a bath this morning, then it all gets mixed up and we forget that there's a difference between the ideal and the actual manifestation of it. So we have, I'm a grand disciple of Jade Waitiswami. We have a few devotees who have a little bit of a problem with him. What they're missing is that there is an ideal of what ISKCON is. It was actually established by Rupa Goswami. And then by the Acharyas, they established what the ideal of the preaching mission is. And then you have the actual preaching mission, which is what we're doing right now. Tomorrow it'll be different, in another temple it'll be different, because it's a different situation. But the problem is, if they don't know that the ideal is transcendental, it's actually been predicted by the Lord himself, then they get all fried out about, the GBC is not doing this, they're not doing that, they're destroying Prabhupada's movement, this, that, the other thing. And it becomes, one thing is that they're selfish and they don't really understand, they haven't been trained. We can get into all that if we want. But that's another thing. But actually they don't see that there's a principle and a detail in the whole mission. And that the principle can't be touched, not by GBC, not by anyone else. The first thing that happened when Mahaprabhu he left was that the whole thing deteriorated into aprasampradayas. But did the absolute truth disappear? No, it didn't. We're still here, Prabhupada's books are here, it's all still here, it'll just be established by someone else. And what we see is that those who start deviating this too much, this or the other way, they will not be successful, because